The crystalline spires of the Galactic Council headquarters caught the light of 3 setting suns, casting prismatic shadows across the gathered crowd. Representatives from over 200 spacefaring civilizations filled the grand amphitheater, their varied forms creating a living tapestry of evolution's endless possibilities. At the center of it all stood High Counselor Vextra, her bioluminescent tendrils pulsing with barely contained excitement as she addressed the assembly. For 10,000 years, the Nexus artifacts have defied our greatest minds, she said, her translator converting her harmonic speech into the standard galactic frequency. Today, we open a new chapter in our quest to understand their mysteries. The holographic display behind her sparked to life, projecting a 3-dimensional image of what appeared to be a simple black cube. But as the image rotated, complex patterns became visible on its surface, shifting, interconnected lines that seemed to dance with mathematical precision. Sarah Chen watched from Earth's designated platform, trying to keep her expression neutral despite the dismissive glances from neighboring delegates. At 32, she was young for a representative to the Galactic Council, and humans were still considered newcomers to the interstellar community. The synthetics to her left had already begun processing the patterns through their quantum neural networks, while the crystalline Ixtheri were using their natural computational abilities to search for mathematical solutions. The patterns have resisted analysis by our most advanced artificial intelligences, Vextra continued. We have applied quantum computing, dimensional analysis, and even attempted to decode them through genetic algorithms. All have failed, which is why we have gathered representatives from every spacefaring species for this unprecedented initiative. Sarah's attention remained fixed on the rotating patterns. There was something about them that tugged at her consciousness, like a half-remembered song. While her colleagues at the Earth Science Institute had insisted on equipping her with the latest in computational assistance, the neural interface sat unused in her quarters. There was something here that raw processing power was missing. Each delegation will receive complete scans of the artifact patterns, Vextra announced. You will have 1 standard galactic year to attempt to decode their meaning. The species that succeeds will gain exclusive rights to any technologies or knowledge contained within. The amphitheater erupted in a cacophony of excited communications. The synthetics were already networking, pooling their processing power. The Ixtheri crystalline structures hummed with computational energy. Even the usually stoic Memberi showed signs of enthusiasm, their color-shifting skin flickering through shades of anticipation. Sarah felt a gentle vibration from her communicator, Dr. James Wong, her mentor at the Earth Science Institute, requesting a private channel. She subvocalized her acceptance. The other delegations are already running quantum analysis, he said without preamble. Why haven't you activated your neural interface? Sarah watched as the pattern continued its hypnotic rotation. Because they're all looking at it wrong, she replied softly. This isn't just mathematics. It's something else. She could practically hear James's frustration. Sarah, we're competing against species that can process information millions of times faster than the human brain. Species that have been studying these artifacts since before we invented the wheel. This isn't the time for human intuition. But Sarah wasn't listening anymore. She had noticed something in the pattern's movement, a regularity that reminded her of music. Without thinking, she began to hum softly, matching her pitch to the rhythm of the shifting lines. Representatives, Vextra's voice cut through the excitement. You will find complete data packets in your delegation's quantum storage. May the most advanced intelligence prevail. As the assembly began to disperse, Sarah felt a presence beside her. A Memberi had approached, its skin shifting through curious patterns of blue and green. You are harmonizing with the artifact's rotation, it said, its translator rendering the color speech into words. Sarah nodded, slightly embarrassed at being caught. The movement reminded me of an old Earth composition, Bach's musical offering. There's a similar mathematical progression in the way the patterns flow. The Memberi skin rippled with interest. Music? You perceive mathematics through sound. Sometimes, Sarah admitted, humans often find patterns through multiple senses, We call it synesthesia, the ability to experience one type of sensation through another sense. Fascinating. The membrane's colors shifted to a deep purple of contemplation. But surely such an imprecise method cannot compete with quantum analysis. Sarah smiled. Maybe that's why no one's solved it yet. Maybe precision isn't the answer. Back in her assigned quarters, Sarah spent hours studying the patterns without any computational aids. She had covered the walls with projections, letting the symbols dance around her in three-dimensional space. Other delegations were already publishing preliminary analyses, each more complex than the last. The synthetics had generated terabytes of correlation data. The X theory had mapped the patterns to 11-dimensional space. But Sarah kept coming back to the music she heard in the movement. She began to map the patterns to musical scales, converting mathematical relationships into tonal progressions. Where others saw only complexity, she began to sense rhythm, harmony, counterpoint. Her communicator chimed again. The synthetics have already mapped 60% of the pattern correlations, James said without greeting. Sarah, you need to start using the tools we gave you. She studied a particular sequence, humming its progression. What if we're all thinking about this backwards? She asked. What if the mathematics isn't the message, but just the medium? Like how we used to encode messages in music during boredom. Sarah, James's voice carried a warning note. I know how it sounds, she interrupted. But think about it. Every species is approaching this from their technological perspective. The synthetics see it as data. The X theory see it as pure mathematics. What if that's exactly why they haven't solved it? And you think you can solve it by humming at it. Sarah watched as the patterns continued their eternal dance. I think whoever created these artifacts wouldn't have made them impossible to decode. I think they would have made them universal. And what's more universal than music? Mathematics expressed through harmony. There was a long silence on the other end. Finally, James sighed. You have 1 year, Sarah. 1 year to prove that human intuition can compete with quantum computing. Don't make me regret supporting your selection. As the connection closed, Sarah turned back to the patterns. She began to sing softly, letting the mathematics flow through her voice, transforming numbers into notes. Somewhere in this mathematical symphony, she was certain, lay a message that no computer could decode. She just had to learn how to listen. 3 months into the challenge, the Galactic Council's research center had become a hive of competitive analysis. The synthetics had constructed a massive quantum computing array that hummed day and night, processing pattern variations at incomprehensible speeds. The crystalline X theory had grown a specialized computational matrix that filled an entire chamber, its faceted surfaces reflecting endlessly recursive calculations. Even the typically reserved membrane had imported their most advanced pattern recognition systems from their homeworld. Sarah's workspace, by contrast, looked more like an ancient Earth conservatory than a modern research facility. She had reconfigured the room's acoustic properties to create perfect resonance, and the walls were covered with musical notations transformed from the artifact's patterns. In the center of the room stood a simple piano, borrowed from the Earth Embassy's cultural center. This is getting out of hand, James said, studying the musical scores with a frown. His holographic projection paced the room, passing through solid objects in a way that still made Sarah slightly uncomfortable. The synthetics announced this morning that they've mapped 80% of the pattern correlations. The X theory claimed they're close to a breakthrough in their dimensional analysis. And you're composing music. Sarah sat at the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys. Listen to this sequence, she said, playing a complex progression that followed one of the artifact's primary patterns. The notes filled the room, creating harmonies that seemed to resonate with the very air. Now watch the pattern as I play. The holographic representation of the artifact's surface rippled in perfect synchronization with the music. Where the notes rose, the patterns peaked. Where they fell, the patterns created valleys of mathematical precision. It's not just similar, Sarah explained, her eyes bright with excitement. It's exact. The mathematical relationships in the patterns are musical relationships. The ratios between frequencies, the harmonic progressions, they're all encoded in the geometry. James rubbed his holographic temples. Even if you're right, how does this help us understand what the artifacts are for? The other delegations are looking for technological principles, scientific knowledge, not concert material. Sarah stood from the piano, walking to one of her notation-covered walls. In human history, music has always been more than entertainment. It's been used to encode messages, to preserve knowledge, to transmit complex information across generations. What if these artifacts aren't just containers for information? What if they're teaching tools? Teaching tools. Think about it, Sarah said, gesturing to the flowing patterns. Every species is approaching this from their most advanced technological perspective. But what if that's exactly what's preventing them from understanding? What if the artifacts are designed to test for something else? Not just the ability to process information, but the ability to perceive it in different ways. A soft chime interrupted them. Another delegation requesting entrance. Sarah was surprised to see the memberry she had spoken with at the opening ceremony, its skin now shifting through curious patterns of gold and violet. "I hope I'm not intruding," it said, its translator rendering the color speech into gentle tones. "But I couldn't help noticing the harmonics emanating from your workspace. They're intriguing." Sarah welcomed the alien in, while James's hologram watched with barely concealed skepticism. The memberry moved through the room slowly, its skin responding to the musical notations with ripples of complementary colors. "You've transformed the mathematical sequences into auditory patterns," it observed. "A unique approach. But how do you account for the multidimensional aspects of the original data?" Sarah returned to the piano. "Through harmony," she explained, playing a complex chord. "Human music isn't just linear. We can express multiple dimensions through simultaneous notes, through the way different musical lines interact with each other. It's how we can hear multiple instruments in an orchestra and understand both their individual parts and how they work together." The memberry's skin flickered with rapid calculations, but the processing power of the human brain cannot possibly compare to our computational systems. How can you hope to understand the complexity? "Because we're not trying to process it," Sarah said softly. "We're trying to feel it, to understand it through experience rather than analysis." She played another sequence, this one following a different pattern from the artifact. "Human consciousness didn't evolve to process pure data. We evolved to find meaning in chaos, to see patterns where others might see only noise. Our strength isn't in our processing power. It's in our ability to synthesize, to connect, to understand through multiple channels simultaneously." The memberry was silent for a long moment, its skin cycling through thoughtful shades of blue. "Your species continues to surprise us," it finally said. "While we seek to overcome our biological limitations through technology, you embrace yours as a source of insight." After the memberry left, James's hologram turned to Sarah with a worried expression. "You realize you're staking Earth's reputation on this approach. If you're wrong, and if I'm right." Sarah interrupted, her fingers finding another sequence on the piano keys. "What if the artifacts aren't just testing our ability to process information? What if they're testing our ability to understand it, to feel it, to connect with it on a level beyond pure computation?" She played the sequence again, and the patterns on the walls seemed to dance in response. Somewhere in this mathematical symphony, she was becoming convinced, lay not just information but understanding. The question was whether humanity's unique way of perceiving the world would prove to be its greatest weakness or its greatest strength. As the notes faded into silence, Sarah began to notice something she hadn't before. In the harmonic relationships between certain sequences, there seemed to be a deeper pattern emerging. Not in the mathematics itself, but in the spaces between the notes, in the way the frequencies interacted with each other. Like a hidden message written not in the music, but in the resonance it created. She began to play again, this time focusing not on the individual patterns, but on the harmonics they generated together. And as the room filled with sound, the artifact's patterns began to shift in a way she had never seen before. The discovery happened at 3 in the morning, Earth Standard Time. Sarah had been playing variations of the same sequence for hours, following a haunting pattern that seemed to echo through multiple harmonics. Her fingers were cramped, her eyes burning from exhaustion, but she couldn't stop. Something was emerging from the mathematical music, like a shape appearing in fog. The holographic patterns around her had begun to resonate in unexpected ways. Where before they had simply matched the musical frequencies, now they were generating secondary patterns, interference waves that created new geometric forms in the space between the original designs. Sarah adjusted her playing, focusing on these emerging patterns, and suddenly the room filled with a sound she had never heard before, a perfect harmony that seemed to vibrate at the quantum level. The artifact's patterns exploded into new complexity, transforming the room into a cathedral of light and mathematics. But it wasn't chaos. It was structure beyond anything she had imagined. The musical frequencies weren't just matching the patterns. They were unveiling layers of information encoded in gravitational waves. Sarah's hands froze above the keys. Record everything, she commanded the room's systems. And get me James. Now. Her mentor's hologram appeared moments later, looking as if he'd been pulled from sleep. Sarah, what's wrong? Look at this, she said, playing the sequence again. The patterns danced and transformed, revealing their hidden depths. The music isn't just matching the patterns. It's a key to understanding gravitational harmonics. The artifacts aren't just containing information. They're teaching us how to manipulate space-time itself. James's holographic eyes widened as he watched the display. That's impossible. The energy requirements for gravitational manipulation are solved through harmonic resonance, Sarah completed. Like pushing a child on a swing, small inputs at the right frequency can create major effects. The artifacts aren't just showing us equations. They're showing us how to feel the gravitational fabric of space-time, how to work with it instead of forcing it. The news spread through the research center like a shockwave. Within hours, representatives from every major delegation had gathered in Sarah's workspace, watching as she demonstrated how musical harmonies could unlock new dimensions of the artifact's patterns. The synthetics stood in uncharacteristic silence, their quantum processors struggling to adapt to this new paradigm. The X-theory's crystalline forms vibrated in resonance with the harmonics, creating their own subtle music. The Memberry representative's skin flickered with rapid calculations. Our species has studied gravitational manipulation for millennia, it said. We've built our most advanced technologies around it. But this is something entirely different. Sarah nodded, her fingers still dancing across the keys. Because you've been trying to dominate gravity through pure force. These patterns show us how to work with it naturally, through resonance and harmony. It's the difference between damming a river and learning to navigate its currents. A synthetic stepped forward, its metallic surface reflecting the shifting patterns. Our analysis suggests that implementing these principles could reduce the energy requirements for gravitational manipulation by a factor of 10,000. But the control systems required don't need to be as complex as you think, Sarah interrupted. Because you're not fighting against space-time anymore. You're working with it, feeling its natural rhythms and harmonies. Like music, it's not just about knowing the notes. It's about understanding how they flow together. The implications were staggering. Current gravitational technology, the backbone of interstellar travel and energy production, required massive installations and enormous power inputs. But if Sarah's interpretation was correct, the artifacts were showing a way to achieve the same effects with minimal energy, using precision and resonance instead of brute force. But how did you see it? The Memberry asked, its skin pulsing with curiosity. Our most advanced pattern recognition systems missed these connections entirely. Sarah smiled, running her fingers across the piano keys. Because you were looking for complexity when the answer was in simplicity. Human music isn't just about individual notes. It's about how they work together, how they create something greater than the sum of their parts. We understand harmony not just mathematically, but emotionally, intuitively. We feel it. She played another sequence, and the room filled with gravitational resonances that made everyone's inner ear tingle. The artifacts weren't designed to test our technological advancement, she continued. They were designed to test our ability to perceive connection, to understand harmony on a fundamental level. They weren't looking for the species with the most processing power. They were looking for the species that could feel the music of the universe. James's hologram watched with a mixture of pride and amazement as Sarah demonstrated more of what she had discovered. The other delegates were already calling their governments, their scientific institutions, realizing that everything they thought they knew about gravitational manipulation was about to change. But Sarah was already looking beyond the immediate implications. As she played through the harmonic sequences, she began to sense something else hidden in the patterns, another layer of complexity that suggested this was only the beginning. The artifacts hadn't just been teaching them about gravity. They were offering a completely new way of understanding the fundamental forces of the universe. And as her fingers found new harmonies, new patterns began to emerge in the holographic display, suggesting depths of knowledge that even she hadn't imagined. The music of the spheres, ancient human philosophers had called it, the cosmic harmony that bound all things together. Perhaps they had been more right than they knew. The Galactic Council's emergency session was unprecedented in both scale and atmosphere. The vast chamber hummed with a tension that went beyond mere political maneuvering. Representatives from every spacefaring species had gathered not just to debate policy, but to confront a fundamental shift in their understanding of the universe. Sarah stood at the center of it all, her simple piano incongruous among the advanced technological displays surrounding her. The past week had been a whirlwind of demonstrations, explanations, and increasingly astonishing discoveries. Each new harmonic sequence she decoded revealed deeper layers of understanding about the nature of space-time. High Counselor Vextra's bioluminescent tendrils pulsed with barely contained excitement as she addressed the assembly. What we have witnessed goes beyond mere technological advancement. The human approach to decoding the artifacts challenges our most basic assumptions about intelligence and understanding. The synthetic collective's primary representative stepped forward, its polished surface reflecting the chamber's lights. Our analysis confirms that the harmonic principles demonstrated by Dr. Chen cannot be fully replicated by computational methods alone. There appears to be an intuitive element that our systems cannot process. Sarah's fingers traced the keys of her piano, not playing yet, just feeling their presence. The past few days had taught her that the artifact's message went far deeper than just gravitational manipulation. The patterns aren't just teaching us about gravity, she said, her voice carrying through the hushed chamber. They're teaching us about connection, about how everything in the universe resonates with everything else. She began to play, and the chamber's advanced sensors translated the harmonics into visible patterns of gravitational waves. The assembled delegates watched in amazement as complex geometric forms took shape in the air, each one representing a different aspect of space-time manipulation. Our ships forced their way through space, Sarah continued, her music creating ripples in the gravitational field that everyone could feel. We bend reality through brute force, using enormous amounts of energy to achieve what could be done with a whisper. If we just learn to work with the natural harmonies of the universe instead of against them. The Membari representative's skin shifted through patterns of deep understanding. You are suggesting that the artifacts were left not just as a technological legacy, but as a test, to find species capable of understanding these harmonies. Sarah nodded, her fingers finding a new sequence that made the chamber's gravity flutter like a gentle breeze. Think about it. Why encode this knowledge in a form that requires more than just computational power to understand? Why make it accessible only through an appreciation of harmony and resonance? The artifacts aren't just teaching us about technology. They're teaching us about consciousness itself. The revelation sent waves of murmuring through the assembly. The implications were staggering. If Sarah was right, The artifact's creators had developed a way of manipulating fundamental forces that required a blend of scientific understanding and intuitive awareness, a combination that pure artificial intelligence or even highly advanced biological computing couldn't replicate. James's hologram appeared beside her, his expression thoughtful. "Show them the temporal harmonics," he suggested quietly. "They need to understand the full scope of what you've discovered." Sarah's hands moved across the keys again, this time playing a complex sequence that seemed to make time itself shiver. The patterns that formed in the air were unlike anything the assembled delegates had ever seen. Four-dimensional structures that suggested ways of manipulating not just space, but time, through harmonic resonance. "These patterns don't just show us how to work with gravity," she explained as the music filled the chamber. "They show us how all the fundamental forces are connected through harmony. Gravity, electromagnetism, the strong and weak nuclear forces, they're all part of a universal symphony. And once you understand the music, you can begin to play with it." The X-theory representative's crystalline form vibrated with excitement. "Our calculations suggest that implementing these principles could revolutionize everything from space travel to energy production. But the control systems required won't work if they're purely mechanical," Sarah finished. "That's what makes this so revolutionary. The artifacts are showing us that true mastery of these forces requires something that can't be reduced to pure mathematics, an intuitive understanding of harmony that only conscious beings can achieve." The implications slowly dawned on the assembly. For centuries, many species had been moving toward ever greater automation, believing that artificial intelligence and computational power were the keys to advancing civilization. But the artifacts suggested a different path, one that required maintaining and developing the intuitive, creative aspects of consciousness alongside technological advancement. High Counselor Vextra's tendrils writhed with intense thought. "This discovery may require us to reevaluate our entire approach to technological development. If the most advanced principles of universal manipulation require conscious intuition to implement, then we need to stop trying to replace consciousness with computation," Sarah said, her music creating patterns of impossible beauty in the air. "We need to learn how to blend them, to use technology to enhance our natural abilities rather than replace them." As if to emphasize her point, she played a sequence that made the very fabric of space-time sing. The chamber filled with harmonics that everyone could feel in their very atoms, a demonstration that no amount of pure computation could have achieved. In that moment, every delegate understood that they were witnessing not just a technological revolution, but a fundamental shift in how intelligent life might approach its relationship with the universe itself. 1 year after Sarah Chen's breakthrough, the landscape of interstellar civilization had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. The massive energy collectors and gravity manipulation arrays that had once dominated space were being replaced by smaller, more elegant systems that worked in harmony with the natural frequencies of spacetime. Ships no longer forced their way through the cosmos, but glided along gravitational currents like sailors reading the wind. Sarah stood at the observation deck of Earth's new Harmonic Research Institute, watching as a ship demonstrated the new principles in orbit. Instead of the usual thunderous display of power, the vessel's departure was almost beautiful, a ripple in spacetime that looked more like a stone dropped in a pond than a tear in reality's fabric. "They're calling it the Chen effect," James said, his hologram materializing beside her. "The use of harmonic resonance to manipulate fundamental forces. You've changed everything, Sarah." She smiled, but her attention was focused on the patterns she could see forming in the ship's wake. "We're still just beginning to understand what the artifacts were trying to teach us. Every new harmonic sequence we decode reveals deeper layers of connection between forces we thought were separate." The Institute itself was a testament to how much had changed. Unlike traditional research facilities with their stark laboratories and computational arrays, this one was designed around principles of acoustic resonance. Each chamber was carefully shaped to amplify different harmonic frequencies, allowing researchers to explore the musical nature of reality itself. The Memberi ambassador approached, its skin shifting through patterns that Sarah had learned to recognize as deep appreciation. "Your discovery has sparked a renaissance across the galaxy," it said. "Species that had abandoned their artistic and musical traditions in favor of pure technology are rediscovering the value of their ancient harmonies." Sarah nodded, remembering how the revelation had spread. It wasn't just about the technology. It was about understanding that consciousness itself was an essential part of working with the universe's fundamental forces. The artifacts hadn't just been teaching them how to manipulate gravity. They had been showing them a new way of being in harmony with reality itself. "We've received another message from the synthetic collective," James said, his holographic form flickering with amusement. "They're requesting more human researchers to help develop what they're calling intuitive interfaces for their new harmonic systems. Apparently, pure computation isn't enough anymore." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. For centuries, biological species have been trying to match the computational power of artificial intelligence. Now, AIs were trying to understand the intuitive, creative aspects of biological consciousness that allowed for true harmonic manipulation. A soft chime announced another arrival. The observation deck's doors opened to reveal High Counselor Vextra herself, her tendrils glowing with formal patterns of respect. "Dr. Chen, the Council has reached a decision regarding the artifact creators." Sarah turned from the window, her heart beating faster. For months, researchers had been studying subtle patterns hidden within the harmonic sequences, trying to understand who had left these teachings and why. The answer had profound implications for the future of intelligent life in the galaxy. "The harmonics contain coordinates," Vextra continued, her translator rendering her excitement in subtle overtones. "Not to a place, but to a frequency, a specific resonance in the fabric of space-time itself. We believe it's an invitation." Sarah felt a shiver of understanding. "They're still out there, aren't they? The pattern makers. They've been waiting to see which species would understand their message." "Not just understand it," the Memberi ambassador added, its skin rippling with insight, "but be ready for it. Any species advanced enough to decode the patterns would have to possess both technological sophistication and the ability to perceive harmony at a fundamental level. They weren't just testing our intelligence, they were testing our consciousness itself." Sarah moved to the chamber's central console, her fingers finding the familiar patterns on its specially designed interface. The new harmonics she had discovered in the past year flowed through her mind like music. They were looking for species that had maintained their connection to the artistic, the intuitive, even as they advanced technologically. Because true mastery of the universe's forces requires both. She began to play, and the observation deck filled with patterns of light and gravity that made visible the invisible connections between all things. The coordinates hidden in the artifact's harmonics took shape in the air, not a point in space, but a resonance that seemed to echo through the very structure of reality. "Humanity's greatest strength," Vextra observed, watching the display with all four eyes, was not advancing beyond its biological limitations, but embracing them. Understanding that consciousness itself is as fundamental to the universe as gravity or light. The patterns shifted, showing how this particular harmonic frequency connected to others, creating a web of resonance that spanned the galaxy. It wasn't just a location or a signal. It was a key to understanding the universe in a way that transcended pure mathematics or computation. "We're ready to attempt contact," Sarah said, her fingers moving across the console in patterns that had become as natural as breathing. "To show them that we understand not just the science, but the art. Not just the mathematics, but the music." As she played the final sequence, the patterns coalesced into a single, perfect harmony, a note that seemed to resonate with the very fabric of space-time itself. In that moment, as the frequency rippled out across the cosmos, Sarah understood that this wasn't just about human achievement or technological advancement. It was about finding our place in a universe that was more alive, more connected, and more beautiful than anyone had imagined. The signal pulsed outward, carrying with it humanity's response to an invitation written in the language of universal harmony. And somewhere out there, The pattern makers were listening, waiting to welcome those who had learned to hear the music of the spheres.